Ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, good morning to all of you, and welcome to the launch of our 2019 State of the Education Report for India, our first ever publication of this kind, and focusing specifically this year on children with disabilities. My name is Eric Falt, and I'm the director of UNESCO for India and the sub-region. I am accompanied today by Mr. Dinesh, who will provide sign language interpretation. According to current statistics, at least 15% of the global population lives with some form of disability. UNESCO, together with its sister UN agencies, believes that it is only just and equitable that this group of over 1 billion people be allowed to participate fully in every sphere of life, which of course must include their right to an education. Here in India, the government has taken proactive steps to empower persons with disabilities through a number of policies and programs, and I want to mention first the Right to Free and Compulsory Education Act of 2009, the so-called RTE Act, which recognizes children with disabilities as a separate category with specialized needs. The landmark Rights to Persons with Disabilities Act of 2016 went further. It identifies and covers 21 types of disability, a significant improvement over the 7 types of disability covered earlier. Children with disabilities in the age group 6 to 18 years now enjoy the right to a free education. Moreover, it is now mandatory for government-funded or government-recognized educational institutions to offer inclusive education for children with disabilities. So, all this to say that much has already been done in India for the education of the nearly 8 million Indian children with disabilities. But with the report that we're launching today, we wanted to take a comprehensive and constructive look at the implementation of these policies. Consider also best practices. I think it's very important to be able to inspire everyone on this issue and suggest also a number of concrete recommendations. We also wanted to present the topic through a more positive lens than the one usually offered to the public. That is why we sent our own teams to document examples of how public and private institutions in India tackle the question and offer hope for children with disabilities. So let us start immediately with the Northeast and the state of Assam to see how the principle of inclusive education is applied.
In the state of Assam, in the northeastern part of India, the percentage of children with disabilities who have never attended an educational institution remains high. However, there are some key players who are working hard to reform this situation. Sishu Saroti, one such organization, is located in Guwahati, the largest city in Assam, and is a strong advocate for the rights of children with disabilities. They offer a range of services which include a center for inclusive and vocational education, an early intervention unit, and an information and communication technology lab.
3 years ago, what we did was we opened our doors of this, what was then a special education center, to children without disabilities from the neighborhood. And we have what we call a reverse inclusion program in our playgroup, where we have 30 children who participate in the class, who are enrolled in the class. Roughly half the number of children are without disabilities and half are children with disabilities. So we are starting early with inclusion. We are encouraging young children to learn and from each other, about each other and with each other.
Another institution working towards the promotion of inclusive education in Guwahati is the Montfort School. The school, founded in 1996, currently caters to the needs of children without disabilities together with children with hearing and visual impairment, cerebral palsy and autism. It has also become a good example in the region for its inclusive infrastructure and unique teaching practices.
So we thought of focusing on inclusive education, and so that all the disabled and the non-disabled can feel that they are together and they feel they are not secluded in the society, and they also have the same equal opportunity like non-disabled children. They have all the facilities, all the rights. They will also be able to study and learn together.
While private schools and NGOs also doing their bit to improve inclusive education in the state, the government is undertaking new initiatives to include assistive technologies and innovative teaching techniques in classrooms. The Commissioner for Persons with Disabilities reiterated for us his commitment towards enhancing the quality of education and quality of life for children with disabilities in the state.
The full focus, at least for my office, has been, towards the education of the disabled. It's so important to bring them to school and to tell them that there is a life beyond the dependence that they have on the parents and on the teachers. And if we fail to do that, I think we'll be failing in our duties completely.
The 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development refers multiple times to disability. Indeed, for those of you who are familiar with the SDGs, you know that 7 of the targets and 11 indicators of the 17 SDGs explicitly draw attention to the requirements of persons with disabilities with respect to education, but also employment, growth, and the development of accessible human settlements. Other recent international frameworks, including, for instance, the new Urban Agenda adopted in 2016 only, and the Charter on Inclusion of Persons with Disabilities, also in 2016, have emphasized that we must be more responsive to the rights of persons with disabilities. And I would now like to give the floor to Renata Lok-Dessallien, the United Nations Resident Coordinator in India, who as such leads our UN family, to tell you how the SDGs have made it important for all of us to better support the needs of people with disabilities. Renata.
Thank you, Eric. Good morning to all of you. Great pleasure to be here. Watching this very, very inspiring video from Assam reminded me that when I was growing up, which was several decades ago, in my primary and my secondary school, there were no children with disabilities. They just weren't there. There were some special schools for children with disabilities, but they didn't include all children with disabilities, just some. And therefore, this kind of segregation, I think, led to many things. I think from the perspective of those children with disabilities who are not included, it made them feel marginalized. It made them feel somehow not part of society. Many of them could have attended the school had some basic provisions been made for them. And I think it deprived them and us of probably lifelong friendships. Fortunately, where I grew up in Canada, the government and society evolved, And several decades ago, they began putting in place provisions so that children with disabilities could come to school, and that more special education classes for children who were really unable to come to regular schools could have access to education. So first of all, I'm really impressed with what they're doing in Assam. And second of all, what has this got to do with the SDGs? Basically, it has everything to do with the SDGs. The SDGs are 17 important goals that the entire world, not just governments, but civil society, private sector, individuals came together around because it was felt they were necessary in order to enhance the well-being of all people on this planet and the planet itself, the environment. These 17 goals apply not only to developing countries, but also to developed countries, because there is still poverty in developed countries. There are still people with disabilities in developed countries who don't have access to basic services. So these are a universal set of goals for countries that are developed, countries that are developing. And these goals are special in another way. They are very interdependent. They're not sectoral in the sense that they are pursued in a kind of linear, hermetic manner. What happens in one goal is recognized to affect what happens in many other goals. So when things go well in terms of achieving one goal, it has multiplier effects over a number of different goals. The SDGs are also extremely important because behind them is I would say, an overriding concern to leave no one behind. I'm sure you've heard that expression before, leave no one behind. And among the groups left behind, of course, are people with disabilities. And so when the international community came together to formulate these SDGs, they were particularly preoccupied with how to factor in the special needs and the special concerns of people with disability. And as Eric has said, these were taken into account in 5 of the global goals, but 7 of the targets of those goals and 11 of the indicators. I'd just like to conclude by saying a few things about the education goal. We're not supposed to put the goals into any kind of hierarchy, but if you stand back and you look at them, and there's one particular goal that stands out, it really is education. Because through education, it has the biggest multiplier effect. It's absolutely basic for everything. And with respect to people with disability, if there's access to education, not only does that enhance job possibilities, but it changes their whole perspective on society, on the world around them, and it helps define themselves. In other words, it helps build self-confidence, it helps enhance their capabilities, and so therefore, if there's one overriding goal, I think that it has to be education. And when we think about leaving no one behind, I think there's no better place to start than people with disabilities. So I'd like to congratulate everybody who's participated in the preparation of today's event and the launching of the report, and I wish it all success. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Renata, for setting the stage for this presentation today. As you will all see in our UNESCO New Delhi report, which will be made available to you at the end of our program, which is supposed to be quite short, so to make sure that we're packed with information, you will see that we advocate repeatedly for the principle of inclusive education for children with disabilities, which means in particular that we should strive to create ecosystems to support and empower them. And we found this positive example in Uttarakhand. Thank you. Always stay here.
The Latika Roy Foundation started in 1994 as a small special education center in Dehradun, capital of Uttarakhand in northern India. While it began with just 2 students who had cerebral palsy, it rapidly expanded to accommodate children with very diverse needs, including children with autism, Down syndrome, speech and language impairments, and attention deficit hyperactivity disorders. The foundation has come to be known for its comprehensive model that offers an ecosystem of services addressing the needs of children with disabilities and their families. At present, they run a range of services which include a diagnostics and assessment center and an early intervention center. Gubbara, which was established under a public-private partnership between the government of Uttarakhand and the Latika Roy Foundation, is a diagnostic center which provides intensive assessment, home plans, training and information for families of children with disabilities. Just as its name implies, balloon in Hindi, the center aims to be affordable and accessible to families across the state.
गुब्बारा में हमारे पास एक डेवलपमेंटल असेसमेंट्स करने के लिए एक प्रोफेशनल्स की टीम रहती है, जिसमें कि साइकोलॉजिस्ट, एक स्पेशल एजुकेटर, फिजियोथेरेपिस्ट, कम्युनिकेशन स्पेशलिस्ट, सब लोग मिलके बच्चों का अर्ली डेवलपमेंटल असेसमेंट्स करते हैं. हम लोग ये फाइंड आउट करने की कोशिश करते हैं कि बच्चों को एग्जैक्टली चैलेंजेस क्या आ रहे हैं उनके डेवलपमेंट में. बेसिक आइडिया इज़ टू फाइंड आउट एरियाज़ इन विच द चाइल्ड इज़ नॉट डूइंग एज अप्रोप्रिएटली, ताकि हम लोग उन एरियाज़ के बारे में उनके पेरेंट्स को बता पाएँ कि उन एरियाज़ में डेवलपमेंट के लिए वो अपने बच्चों की मदद कैसे करें.
The foundation's continued success can be attributed to its innovative methods to reach families, whether it is at the centers, in the community, or in their own homes.
We have a very active awareness campaign where we're working in the community to create awareness and understanding and acceptance of differences. We think that the community is tolerant and accepting, but only when they know that the problem exists.
Through its network of village health workers, doctors, government officials and students, the foundation manages to cover neighboring peri-urban and rural blocks of surrounding districts of Dehradun, bringing assessment and intervention to families who find accessibility and distance a challenge.
In the field of education, UNESCO's role is probably not very visible to the media and to the general public, probably because we work first and foremost with government stakeholders to enhance policy, provide capacity building, and support various education principles which have been endorsed at the international level. Our main interlocutor is first and foremost the Ministry of Human Resource Development and its arm, the National Council of Education Research and Training. We are hoping that before the end of this program, Mrs. L.S. Changsan, the Joint Secretary for School Education and Literacy of MHRD, will be able to join us as planned. We all know that it's a very busy day for government, so we fully understand, of course, that she's being delayed. But let's move immediately to yet another positive example of what is being done in India. And in this case, we decided to travel to Mumbai to see in different institutions how educators bring hope to children with disabilities.
While the state of Maharashtra in Western India is home to a significant number of children with disabilities, it also boasts a high percentage of them attending educational institutions. The Navi Mumbai Municipal Corporation, NMMC, is the first municipal corporation to have created a separate department for disability. In 2007, it established a special school for children with hearing impairments and subsequently extended its service to children with visual impairments, autism, and other intellectual disabilities.
In India, we have a really best laws. We have signed UNCRPD. We have this 3% budget utilization. There are a lot of NGOs working so hard in the disability sectors. We wanted to initiate a department which will actually work at a root level.
Currently, an educational training center offers support to children enrolled in regular schools by providing them with remedial education, physiotherapy, occupational and speech therapy. In addition to this, the center is known for its innovative ways to ensure accessibility and inclusion. The Gateway School is another such institution that uses innovative practices to bridge the gap for children who struggle to keep up with the regular curriculum. By using simple ICT tools like text-to-speech software, the school has equipped their students to set the pace of their learning as per their own different
You can
needs.
say that the role of what we teach is to enable our children to communicate in the world, understand and comprehend from the world, and express themselves in different ways so that they can, to enable them for their future lives.
In another part of Mumbai, Pratham in M Ward has the highest incidence of disability in Mumbai. The community center, which is located in an urban slum, supports children with disabilities by offering therapeutic services, conducting school enrollment drives, remedial education classes, and parental training.
We're looking at children who are in the communities who are not in schools. So we've enrolled these children with special needs in the government schools. We also are running community centers so that we work with these children, give them follow-up services and work with their parents. And more, I think importantly, we have an approach of what is called remedial to developmental. When I say remedial, we are saying that children whom we find are with special needs, whether they need surgeries, sometimes they just need identification, sometimes they need disability certificate, they need to be connected to various resources. So one of our unit does this work, gives direct services to children.
Just like these organizations, there are many more working tirelessly in India to make inclusive and accessible education a reality for all children.
At this point, some of you, perhaps even many of you, will think that we are perhaps being too positive about the issue at hand. And we understand because, yes, it is clear that despite the articulation of global frameworks and national policies in favor of people with disabilities and the concrete steps taken to implement them, as we've already seen in 3 different parts of the country, there remain disturbing gaps between commitments made and the everyday reality of persons with disabilities. This is true around the world and in India as well. And I would now like to turn to Ms. Ira Singhal, who's with us today. She's the brand ambassador for the Department of Disability at the Ministry of Social Justice and Empowerment. And she also works very closely with the Ministry of Women and Child Development and Niti Aayog. She's been a speaker on education, disability, gender, and other topics at many international and national conferences. Thank you very much for coming. You've not been involved in the preparation of this report, and you're actually sort of discovering it with everybody today. But do you think that in the end it might be helpful for the government of India and all those who are active in supporting this cause?
Absolutely. Thank you so much for giving me this opportunity. And I'm so glad that this is a sector that people are now thinking of. For many, many years, most of us clearly ignored it. And, I completely agree with you, ma'am, when you say that education is where the change will come. I would not be standing here if it were not for the opportunities in education that I got. And I'll give you a very simple logic to all of this. As of now, we still somewhere in our heads think of it as something that we are doing for the people with disabilities. As something that we need to give them, we need to enable them for, because it's somewhere our responsibility or a charity that we're doing. Let me give you a different perspective. If we are a country, let's take a family. If in a family, only one person earns, and the rest of the 3 people in that 4-member family are dependent on that one person, the whole income of the family goes down, the time, energy, and the financial resources of the family go down. But if we enable every person of that family to earn to their capacity, we give them that opportunity, that platform that they all work till whatever level they can, the burden on that one person gets reduced, the burden on the economy of the family gets reduced. If that person is earning 100 rupees, everybody else contributes 5 rupees, that still adds up. But if that one person is earning 100, his money will now go towards just putting those other 3 people up to that basic level. You know, the income per person gets reduced, and that is the reason as a country, as a world, it's very important for all of us to enable every single person to work to the best of their capacity. And for people with disabilities, it is usually the fact that they are physically limited. So when you're physically limited, it's your mental capacities which will make the biggest difference. And hence, education plays the biggest role in that. Education is the one solution to getting most people with disabilities to contribute, to give them that confidence, to give them that platform that they can also be a productive part of society, a productive part of that country. And for a developing country like us, we cannot have too many dependent hands. We cannot have dependent people, we cannot have dependent mouths to feed. So it's just for, if you take it selfishly, it's for a selfish reason that we should all work towards getting all people with disabilities to the platform that they can go to. And let's be selfish in that respect. Let's just get everybody to the place that they can be, because the burden on the rest of us then goes down. So that's my one perspective, that that is the reason that education is so important, and that's the reason that a country like us really needs this. So thank you so much for doing this, and thank you so much for this report.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us. Thank you very much. And for our last example of good practice, our team went to Karnataka. And I would like to mention here that all the photographs and videos that you have seen and will see today have been conceived so that they can be pretty much used by anybody in any context, and they are absolutely free of rights. We just ask that you give brief credit to UNESCO New Delhi. And for the media who are here with us today, please be aware that we have a lot of additional B-roll and a longer 5-minute video on the launch of the report. Feel free to approach our public information team to access all this material. Rekha and Nitya in particular are here in the room. But let's watch this last video.
In the small district of Shivamogga in Karnataka, southwest India, a government primary school has been fulfilling the educational aspirations of children with disabilities since 1991. The school, with just 4 teachers, including the headmaster Kumara HC, supports children with different learning requirements, particularly those with neurodevelopmental disabilities and high support needs.
ಅದಕ್ಕೆ ನಮ್ಮ ಆಫೀಸಿಂದನೂ ಸಹ ನಮಗೆ ಸಹಕಾರವನ್ನು ಕೊಟ್ಟಿರ್ತಾರೆ. ಹೀಗೆ ನಮ್ಮ ಶಾಲೆಯಲ್ಲಿ ಎಲ್ಲ ಇದೆ, ಆದರೆ ಬೇರೆ ಬೇರೆ ಜಿಲ್ಲೆಗಳಿಂದ ಈ ಶಾಲೆಗೆ ತರಬೇತಿಗಾಗಿ ಬರ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದಾರೆ. ಅವರಿಗೆ ಉಳ್ಕೊಳ್ಳೋಕ್ಕೆ ವ್ಯವಸ್ಥೆ ತುಂಬ ಕಷ್ಟ ಆಗ್ತಾ ಇದೆ, ಯಾಕಂದರೆ ಅವ್ರಿಗೆ ನಡೆಯೋಕ್ಕೆ ಬರಲ್ಲ. ಅಂಥ ಸಂದರ್ಭದಲ್ಲಿ ಅವರಿಗೆ ಆಟೋ ವ್ಯವಸ್ಥೆ ಮಾಡಬೇಕಾಗತ್ತೆ. ಮನೆಗಳು ಕೆಲವೊಂದು ಮಕ್ಕಳು ಎಷ್ಟೋ ಮಕ್ಕಳು ಈಗ ಒಂದು 8-10 ಮಕ್ಕಳು ಮತ್ತೆ ರಿಟರ್ನ್ ಅವರು ಮನೆಗೆ ಹೋಗ್ಬಿಟ್ಟಿದ್ದಾರೆ.
They also run a fully equipped resource center which offers physiotherapy, speech therapy, and cognitive stimulation aids. In the absence of therapeutic services in this remote area, these services are helpful for families in and around the district.
ಶಿಕ್ಷಣ ಇಲಾಖೆಯೂ ಕೂಡ ನನಗೆ ಅತ್ಯುತ್ತಮವಾದಂತಹ ಆಸಕ್ತಿಯನ್ನು ವಹಿಸಿ ಈ ಶಾಲೆಯ ತಪಾಸಣೆ ಆಗಲಿ ಪ್ರತಿಯೊಂದು ಮಕ್ಕಳ ಯೋಗಕ್ಷೇಮಗಳ ಬಗ್ಗೆಯೂ ಕೂಡ ಇವರು ನೋಡಿಕೊಂಡು ಹೋಗ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದಾರೆ. ಹೀಗೆ ಪೋಷಕರ ಬಗ್ಗೆ ಹೇಳಬೇಕು ಅಂತಂದರೆ ಒಂದು ವಿಶೇಷತೆ, ಪೋಷಕರು ಬೆಳಗ್ಗೆಯಿಂದ ಹಿಡಿದು ಸಂಜೆಯವರೆಗೂ ನಮ್ಮೊಂದಿಗೆ ಇದ್ದು ಮಕ್ಕಳ ಕಲಿಕೆಗೆ ಅತ್ಯವಶ್ಯಕವಾದಂತಹ ಚಟುವಟಿಕೆಗಳೊಂದಿಗೆ ಸಹಕಾರವನ್ನು ನೀಡ್ತಾ ಆ ಮಗುವಿನ ಸರ್ವತೋಮುಖ ಅಭಿವೃದ್ಧಿಗೆ ಪೋಷಕರು ನಮಗೆ ಕೈ ಜೋಡಿಸ್ತಾ ಇರುವುದು ನಿಜಕ್ಕೂ ಕೂಡ ನನಗೆ ಶ್ಲಾಘನೀಯವಾಗಿದೆ.
The Sarchi Institute for Special Children is a non-profit organization working in the same district which provides medical aid and educational training to children with physical and mental disabilities.
Our main intention was, I'm a pediatrician. I used to refer all these kids almost 250 kilometers away from this place just for the training process. Keeping in that mind, it was always breaking my heart that we should do something for these kids, and we started this institute.
These two institutions have set a strong precedent for other schools and organizations. Provisions and opportunities for learning and development can be created with limited resources.
We have now been joined by Ms. Shakuntala Doley Gamlin, who is the Secretary of the Department of Empowerment of Persons with Disabilities within the Ministry of Social Justice and Empowerment. And so we've just gone through, sort of set the stage for this report and showcased a number of positive and best practices throughout India. Mentioned, of course, that there's a solid framework legally. But we know also that there are a lot of difficulties and challenges, and I would like to ask you now if you can talk to us about some of these challenges as you see them, please. Should be on.
Thank you very much. I would first of all like to congratulate the UNESCO and the state governments for their joint initiative to look at how well the inclusive education, which is mandated under the Rights of Persons with Disabilities Act, and also under the right to education, universal free education, how much of it is actually taking roots in the states. I was in fact in a meeting in my capacity as the RCI chairperson with the National Council for Technical Education and the NCRT, and of course my own experts from the Rehabilitation Council of India, where we are looking at standardization of the special education curriculum for teachers. I often find that in my previous tenures as chief secretaries of state governments, we used to grapple with the issue of getting subject teachers like maths, science, English and Hindi, and also to distribute the teachers proportionately within the schools and within the sort of education department. So I found that to have a special educator for each and every disability is a challenge, will continue to be a challenge. So we were looking at how to make, say, the physical impairment, the visual hearing as one, intellectual, developmental and learning disabilities as one, and other disabilities. And not only do we need to have special educators, we need to have sensitization for the entire community and the in-service teachers. So can we have a universal in-service teachers training for the entire teacher community, and also make provision for special educators who will be actually taught to look at disabilities not individually, but looking at three verticals of physical, visual, hearing impairment, locomotor as one, intellectual learning and developmental disabilities as one, and other disabilities. So I was eliciting, trying to elicit and solicit some of the comments of expert persons who have worked in this field. I'm very, very happy to know that we are looking at the gaps, we're doing a gap analysis, and how do we make the policies so that this is something which we can address jointly with the civil society NGOs who have got tremendous experience in this field, and also with experts, the medical fraternity and the education department. So we are looking at the women and child, education, health and social welfare. These four departments are sine qua non to the universal inclusive education. Also for the early intervention care. I often find, having worked in the health ministry, having driven some of the immunization programs and the non-communicable disease vertical programs, I find that where medical science and rehabilitation science will have to work as complementary disciplines, and early intervention must kick in where medical science cannot provide any succor of medicine or surgery or diagnosis, where a child between 0 to 6 years, when the child's brain is still developing, can we have a habilitation rehabilitative care where the child's disability can be reversed, reduced, mitigated, and we can actually ensure some sort of preparatory skills for the child to be able to be part of inclusive education. Inclusive education just mandated will not be a reality, because often community and the family suffers from stigma, prejudice, and sort of hostile behavior towards the child. So can we ensure that such preparatory schools are there within the education system, education being part of the state government's mandate, and disability is also part of the local self-government, state government. But when we drive a policy from the center, we need to standardize, make programs and make policies that are implementable within the short period, and the targets are achievable, and visibility of what we have achieved can be seen in the field. Disabilities is a subject which we are now driving through the Rights of Persons with Disabilities Act, a legislation which is a historic legislation which came about in 2017. And now state governments are in the process of notifying the rules. I think when I joined, it was about 1 or 2 states. We have now 19 states and union territories that have notified the Disabilities Act and the rules. And since the Act is universally applicable, they're trying to enforce each and every provision of the Act. Also, we have certain Supreme Court judgments and judicial intervention that have strengthened our enforcement of the Act. But we need to work in concert. We need to see that disabled persons are not to be treated differently. They are a part and parcel of society, and when empowered, they can actually translate the entire economy into a very sort of the kind of momentum, because if you look at 3 crores of disabled persons and you include their parents and community, you'd say at least 10 to 12 crores of people are struggling on how to fight disabilities, how to sustain the treatment, care, and the cost of such persons. So I think we all need to collectively think that we are empowering the nation when we empower the disabled persons. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And I think you've touched on a number of points which will be indeed included in the report that we will make available in just a few moments. In the report, you will see that children with disabilities still continue to constitute a significant proportion of out-of-school children in India. Recent figures indicate that about 28% of children with disabilities are not in schools. Trends also show that 45% of Indian children with disabilities fail to attain literacy, and overall the literacy rate of all persons with disabilities at 54% is considerably lower than the national literacy rate. So there's a host of issues, and I think we are just starting to, as we get into the report, be exposed to some of them. A lack of educational resources, infrastructure, qualified teachers for children with disabilities, sometimes coupled indeed with discriminatory attitudes towards them, have created a situation where less than 1/3 of India's population of disabled persons is able to join the country's workforce. So to look at all of these aspects, we decided to pair up with the Tata Institute of Social Sciences, TIS, based in Mumbai, and recognized for the excellence of their research work. They worked tirelessly for 9 months together with our UNESCO team, and I also want here to acknowledge the patient coordination and input from my colleague Huma Masood within our team based in New Delhi. The report draws extensively on existing and new research on the subject at both national and global levels, but also consultations with key stakeholders, including disability experts, institutions, civil society organizations, parents, teachers, and educationists. But to tell us more about the preparation of the report, I would like to give the floor to Dr. Padma Sarangapani from the Center for Education, Innovation, and Action Research at TIS to explain on behalf of their whole team, and there are many who are here in the room, the complexity of preparing this report. Please.
80-year-old institution which has been working to further, is it okay now? Yeah. The Tata Institute of Social Sciences is over 80 years old, and we have a long history of addressing issues of social development and social justice through professional action. So when we were invited to participate in this important report, we were thoroughly delighted. We thought it certainly furthers our own dedication and interest in using education as a way to bring about social transformation. Dr. Archana Mehendale, my colleagues, Dr. Ramchand, Dr. Sonia Sani, and Bhagyalakshmi worked tirelessly and and enjoyed the interactions with the UNESCO team, with Eric, Huma, to bring about this report. I think we the team undertook both a deep dive and a landscaping kind of task to look at the enormous data, legislation, and social action on the ground which exists, which was drawn upon to build this report. We acknowledge the generosity of all of you who work on the ground tirelessly and sharing your insights, your experiences, and the data that you have to make this report possible. Also, the editorial team worked very closely, and the conversations that the TIS team had with the editorial team really have gone into giving this report its sharp focus, and I hope you will all find the representation of issues, the kinds of analysis that the report has been able to provide, reflecting the joint concerns of this community. The team especially enjoyed working with the UNESCO team, because when we have these interactions with UNESCO, we are aware of the international standards. We become a part of an international community, and that experience is very enriching. Particularly working with the audiovisual team of UNESCO has been enormously enriching. We've learned the importance of not only good research, but good communication, so that we bring issues to proper light within the national discourse, and also reach out and collaborate internationally to solve these important social issues. We do think that this report has been able to achieve bringing focus on some issues, but we also realize that there were gaps that we need to work on further, the financing model that needs to be there, the systemic integration that the disability sector needs, the kind of intersectoral work that you, madam, were referring to. I think these are areas in which a lot more work will be needed, and we're hoping that as a community now we will throw our weight behind these new directions of work. We ourselves at TIS have been innovating in use of technology in education, in the importance of teacher education, so we ourselves are going to draw on this enriching experience in how we further our own work at the institution. So thank you, Eric, thank you, Huma, for this great opportunity of working with your team.
Thank you very much. Again, you definitely and all the team deserve a round of applause, and thank you very much for all of the support. Thank you. So, as you're going to read in more detail in a moment, a set of 10 recommendations has emerged from the analysis of our researchers and is proposed for consideration at the end of the report. There's also an executive summary and a short form for the recommendations at the beginning of the report. We hope that these recommendations and suggestions will be useful for all stakeholders, especially as the Government of India works towards the finalization of its new national education policy. We're not going to go through all of the recommendations in detail today, but for those of you who follow UNESCO UNELI on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook, and I hope there were many before and even more after, you will be reminded of them over the next few days as part of the social media campaign that we have started on the subject. So recommendation 1, which you're seeing behind me, is to amend the Right to Education Act of 2009 to better align with the Rights of Persons with Disabilities Act of 2016 by including specific concerns of education of children with disabilities. Again, much more in the report. For recommendation 2, let us watch this short video.
one of the key recommendations is to establish a department under the aegis of the Ministry of Human Resource Development that will look at convergence across ministries. Currently now there are 3 or 4 ministries that are looking after the needs of children with disabilities, and it is important that there is convergence across these ministries, and if one department can lead in a sense the programs relating to education for children with disabilities, it would bring in better convergence, and hence implementation will be much stronger.
The report benefited from the valuable advice and involvement of a high-level editorial board to guide and adjust the publication as and when necessary. I think pretty much all members of the board are with us today, and a couple of them will speak. I'm certainly very grateful to all of them for volunteering their precious time, and I want to give the floor immediately to Dr. Subba Ilapavuluri, Secretary to the Vice President of India, who's had a long and distinguished career here in India and internationally. You know very well, of course, that reports are one thing, and that most of the time they meet with opposition, criticism, and more. Do you think that this report, that's my question, might influence policy and implementation when it comes to the education of children with disabilities?
Thank you, Eric, and thank you, friends, for giving me this opportunity to be present at this very important event, which is dedicated to a very small proportion of learners, but very important in terms of policy implications, and also ensuring that the larger SDG goals, which our UN representative had mentioned, gets actually translated into reality. This is a day of hope. This is a day when we are celebrating something which is happening in this vast country. Eric has given me a tough question. He is asking, will this report remain on the shelf, or will it get translated into something tangible for the millions of disabled and children with disabilities? Will their future be brighter as a result of the combined efforts and the collective wisdom of everyone here and outside this hall? I see quite a bit of hope, and I think that this is an opportune moment for us to bring out this report and launch it today, because we do have an opportunity which comes very rarely. The national policy on education, which gets revised periodically, is currently under discussion, and there's a good possibility that we should influence how that report, that national policy could incorporate some of the excellent ideas which have emanated from this report. It's also important for us to recognize that we are also at a moment when the cornerstone of state policy in India is talking of inclusion. The familiar phrase which many of us are familiar now is Sabka Saath, Sabka Vikas, which translates to ensuring that we support everyone to realize the inner potential to grow. So I think inclusion being the larger theme, this report, which focuses on inclusion and education of special needs children, would have a better opportunity for us to make some progress. As I see it, I was very happy to be associated with the preparation of the report, and I must thank UNESCO for giving us this opportunity as a part of the editorial board to have a look at it and give some suggestions which were possibly useful in bringing out this report. As I see it, there are 3 pillars which are emanating out of this report, which need special focus. One is technology, the second is training, and third is teamwork. These come out of the report very clearly. I think there is immense possibility in a country like ours, in India, where technology is making a lot of progress. We need to work further on the training of special educators, teachers, and maybe educational administrators as well. Teamwork is absolutely critical, as comes out of the report and the video presentations which you have seen. We need therapists, teachers, child psychologists, and pediatricians. But what is critical is from policy to implementation, again, is something very critical for us. The video presentations and the examples which are there in the report point to what has already been done. And that is a good way to motivate and say that it's a mission which is desirable, but it's also a mission which is possible. I do hope this happens in our country, and whatever we can do from our side, I think collectively we should do our bit to ensure that this doesn't remain on the shelf of either UNESCO or the ministries, but gets translated in the classrooms, in the lives of the children we are trying to transform. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for your contribution. So for recommendation 3, we focused on the share of education budgets that is actually allocated for children with disabilities and found that disability budgeting could be useful to better track resource allocation. But let us see a little bit more with this video.
Families who have a child with disability often face a severe financial burden. The lack of resources also affects the quality of education of the child. While the government allocates limited grants for the education of children with disabilities, issues of management and underutilization of allocated funds also pose many challenges in implementation. Therefore, it is important to streamline financial management systems and procedures to minimize delays in the release of these funds. A 2019 UNESCO New Delhi report recommends ensuring specific and adequate financial allocation in the education budget to meet the learning needs of children with disabilities. The introduction of disability budgeting is a way of helping the government to track resource allocation, review its progress, and establish appropriate accountability.
Going back to the editorial board, I want to introduce now Dr. Anita Julka, former head of the Department of Education of Groups with Special Need at NCERT, who was a formidable presence in our board and injected extremely useful advice. Please tell us about your experience with us in the editorial board. I can certainly say that you didn't make it necessarily very easy to the researchers at TIS, but I also know they came to very much appreciate your views. Please, Anita.
Long time back, when I joined this field, this was nearly 25 years back, I was doing research and I went to a house with a 15-year-old girl with some spinal injury and who could not move but was not brain dead. There I found that this girl was going to school, but as she grew older, she needed to be picked up and taken to the school. So the parents, who were poor parents, thought that now there's no point sending her to school. So she was lying in the house. And she was very vocal, she was a very happy child. And I asked her what is her desire in life to become what. She used to sing and she used to write poems, like say poems. So she told me that my desire, she told me, not in the presence of anybody, is to actually die. When I asked her why, she says, I am such a stress for my parents who have to be with me, take me around, and do so much for me. That is the time I realized that these are the children for whom you need to advocate. And that's what exactly I did in the editorial board. I was always strongly recommending the kind of work which we have done in 25 years should be mentioned in the report, because I feel that though we are signatory to a number of declarations and commitments, we are also doing a lot of work in India. And that kind of contextualization which we have, the context-specific things we have done, that is how our report would be more relevant if we mention that. And that's what TIS has beautifully done, I must say. And also I would like to say that the recommendations which we are now presenting here and for which we are fighting in the NP also would all go together to make an impact for making the lives better for our children. Thank you, Ritik.
Thank you so much, Anita. When it comes to disability, women and girls with disabilities are the targets of multiple forms of discrimination. They are actually 3 times more likely than men with disabilities to have unmet healthcare needs. They are 3 times more likely to be illiterate. They're twice less likely to be employed, and they're twice less likely to use the internet. You must have already realized from our choice of photographs and in the videos that we took great care of the gender dimension in the research and illustration of the report. Here's why and how.
It is essential to consider the role of gender every step of the way. For UNESCO, gender is a priority. For the 2019 UNESCO New Delhi report, as a first step, we applied gender lens in the analysis of inclusive quality education for children with disabilities nationally. We included disaggregated data with a nested approach to make results more specific with nuanced recommendations. As per Gender Equality Action Plan for 2014-21, the report ensured throughout the document that gender equality and equity is reviewed in policies and programs for children with disabilities, like for WASH programs, professional development, assistive devices and curricular adaptations. Thus, the report is engendered and gender transformative.
It goes without saying that we consulted extensively advocates and representatives of persons with disabilities for the preparation of the report. And I want to recognize here Mr. Arman Ali, Executive Director of the National Center for Promotion of Employment for Disabled People. He too was on our editorial board, and I would like to invite him to tell us more about the non-profit institution that he leads and which works as an interface with the government, industry, but also international agencies. Please.
Audible? Yes. Thank you so much. I think I must compliment UNESCO first for this excellent idea and this report, and for having me as one of the editorial board member. I think for organizations like NCP, DP and others, my colleagues who are present in the room of from various organizations, it's so important that we collaborate with the state from time to time to bring out the best which is in the interest of disabled people. And education being one of the pillars for NCP, DP, where we focus, because without education you cannot have employment, without employment you cannot change people's life. It has been an excellent experience of being part of this excellent board. I also like to recognize my colleague Rajiv Raturi, who pitched in while I was away for a while. And I think this report could not have been more appropriately timed, because of the national policy on education is there for discussion and feedback. And as rightly pointed out by Madam Secretary, Mrs. Gamlin, that it's very complementing the Rights of Persons with Disability Act really encompasses a lot of these recommendations which are being made, that all the 10 recommendations we talk about in the report is in line with what RTE talks about or the RPWD Act talks about. So I think it will complement and it will only further the implementation process, and it will help in creating the awareness which it requires, especially when it comes to education. So one of the things which we believe that, when you talk about inclusion, inclusion cannot happen unless you are present. And you cannot be present unless you are able to get there. So when you look at education and inclusive education, it's very important that we look at the entire ecosystem. We must ensure the built environment is barrier-free. We need to look at the curriculum, which is universally designed to help universal learning for children with disability. And also, not to forget the transport system, how you're including transport, the roads and so on, so that children with disability are able to reach the neighborhood school without any barriers. I think it's been excellent to be a part of this board, and thank you so much, Eric, once again.
Thank you very much. Let us now turn to recommendations 4 and 5 of our report. Recommendations 4 is to strengthen data systems to make them robust, reliable, and useful for planning, implementation, and monitoring. This recommendation is made with the belief that uniformity in definitions and availability of sex-disaggregated data on disability using international measures will vastly improve accuracy and validity of data. Recommendation 5 now is to enrich school ecosystems and involve all stakeholders in support of children with disabilities. Here again, we believe that providing school ecosystems with adequate support structures and services and rallying all stakeholders in support of children with disabilities will help create a common sense of purpose around inclusive education through shared and contextual understanding. For recommendation 6, let's look at the screen.
Information and communication technologies and assistive technologies play a central role in advancing the education of children with disabilities. They are useful for students with a wide spectrum of disabilities, from learning disabilities to severe physical impairments. ICTs have proven to be instrumental in increasing independence, improving participation, communication, and overall learning outcomes for children with diverse learning needs. While disability laws often fail to include ICTs in the definition of accessibility, India has addressed this by formulating the National Policy on Universal Electronic Accessibility. However, lack of awareness and availability continue to be major barriers in the adoption of ICTs. A 2019 UNESCO New Delhi report recommends massively expanding the use of ICTs for the education of children with disabilities. It is important to develop assistive technologies which are available, accessible, acceptable, adaptable, affordable, and of good quality.
Again, all of the videos that you're seeing today and more is available for any one of you who wishes to use it to promote and advocate on behalf of children with disabilities and for their education. I'm very pleased that we have now been joined by my colleague and friend Yasmin Haq, Director and Representative of UNICEF in India. UNICEF is, of course, the leader in our UN family for everything having to do with children, and our two organizations work hand in hand for the achievement, in particular, of Sustainable Development Goal 4 and Education for All. So thank you very much, Yasmin, for coming. I know you have a very busy day, so thank you for joining us. Please.
Thank you very much, Eric, and really everyone here, it's a privilege for me to be part of this ceremony that launches a report that indeed is very timely. I'd especially like to congratulate UNESCO and Tata for really taking this work forward, and to the editorial committee who I'm sure have driven to make sure that children's issues don't get the right place in the report. The focus of a first report on the state of children's education with especially on disability, I think is really important. And we've heard for many reasons why. UNESCO and UNICEF, of course, we share a mandate, and that mandate is rooted in the human rights framework, the Convention on the Rights of the Child, the Convention on the Rights of Protecting People with Disability, and that is also in the national legislature, whether it's through the RTE or through the national policy on people with disability. At the same time, we have to remember that what we talk about, the mandate, is about the right of every child, every girl and every boy, everywhere, to education. And with this shared mandate, it's really important that we look at especially those who are not being included, those who are being excluded. And I hope the report is really going to help bring this issue to the forefront. I'll just echo what Renata said about the SDGs are about education. I think all of us involved in it know that it's going to be core and central to it, and especially on the SDG 4, where there are very clear markers on how we look at lifelong learning for everyone and for inclusive quality education in a country. The case for inclusion, you know, we say it's clear. It's clear in the sense that having children with different abilities in the same classroom, it builds tolerance, it builds understanding, which is something that we keep talking about. How do we have a more inclusive society? It has shown, as Eric has mentioned, better outcomes for children with disability when they are able to go to school and in an inclusive environment. And it also reduces the welfare costs on not just the government and society, but also very much on the family, as children who grow up to be adults who have been through an inclusive education process do have better access to enter the labor market or to develop skills that help them in their care and their livelihood. I think when we talk to parents of children with disability, it also helps them. It helps them in the fact that the children are going to school, they are socializing, and the whole burden is being shared to an extent. It helps them in that sense of they are not alone in working with or being parents to children who have disabilities, because it can be very intense. And those of us who have seen it in our own families or our communities know what the burden can be. Still, it's not happening, right? Children with disabilities, as again Eric mentioned, and I'm sure the report will also highlight it, is a third of the children with disabilities or out-of-school children are those who have disabilities. We know that even when they are in school, they're either not learning, either because the teachers have not been trained with the requisite skills, or they don't have the tools that are available, or the whole attitude that is needed is not pervasive. So there are small steps that have been taken. Eric has mentioned a few. We've worked jointly together in a joint UN program to look at what the barriers are to promote inclusive education, to train trainers in 5 states, and through a cascade methodology, look at developing resource pools of trainers and other people. There's a guidebook that has been developed on making schools accessible, because as we heard from our colleague, that even the accessibility is a huge issue. How do you get there? And even when you get there, are you able to navigate? Is the toilet big enough? How do you get to the toilet? And I think those are things that you really have to look at from a lens of someone with a disability. Training audit work, training civil works personnel to design issues, and importantly to conduct audits on, is a school accessible for people with disabilities, something that is really important if we are to take the discussion forward. The challenge, of course, is, can we take it to scale? And what do we learn from the audits that are done? I think UP is planning to do audits in 10,000 schools. We'll learn from them. These are small steps, they're timely. The national education policy, we're putting a lot of our hope on that. The implementation will be an issue. because it will mean structural changes, it'll mean attitudinal changes. So we heard of the ICT challenges that are also required in 2019 in India, that is in the forefront of ICT. We have the tools, we have the technology, we have to have a stronger will, and together we'll take it forward. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much, Yasmin. So let's look now at recommendation 7, which I think will come very nicely after Yasmin's remark and echo also what Renata was saying earlier. Recommendation 7 is a reminder to give a chance to every child and to leave no child with disability behind when it comes to education too. You will find more on this specific recommendation in our report, which also suggests that the school education quality index should include specific indicators pertaining to education of children with disabilities. As for recommendation 8, let us watch the screen again.
Transforming teaching practices. The implementation of an inclusive education system in India requires improvement in the curriculum, classroom arrangements, provision of aids and appliances, and most importantly, a focus on teacher preparation. Currently, teachers who are working either in special schools or in mainstream inclusive settings often lack adequate training and struggle with under-resourced classrooms, which in turn adversely impacts the education of children with disabilities. A 2019 UNESCO New Delhi report recommends transforming teaching practices both at national and state level to better address the needs of diverse learners. The report places emphasis on providing appropriate teacher education, creating open access repositories of teaching learning materials, and development of standardized diagnostic tools in different regional languages. Only when we empower the teachers will we be able to truly empower all of our children.
Recommendation 8, which I think Mrs. Gamlin alluded to earlier, the importance of supporting the teachers as well. Recommendation 9 is now going to be explained to you better than I would by the chief of our education team at UNESCO New Delhi, Omar Mam Diop.
One thing of which all of us agree is the need to overcome stereotypes and build positive dispositions towards having inclusive classroom environment and societies. Children with disabilities must not be seen as different. Sometimes our judgment affects them and makes them suffer. The fact that such attitudes are so illogical often leads to the children being faced with criticism. There is a need to launch concerted campaigns and awareness raising at all levels. The 2019 UNESCO New Delhi report has several messages, and one of the key messages is the need to emphasize the rights of children with disabilities to participate in inclusive schools. And that must be our duties, the duties of all stakeholders in respecting, protecting, and fulfilling these rights.
We're coming to recommendation 10, the last of our recommendations. And some of you will perhaps justifiably see in that recommendation an echo of SDG 17, because it urges that we foster effective partnerships involving government, civil society, the private sector, and local communities for the benefit of children with disabilities. If we can please have recommendation 10 on the screen, please. And this last recommendation is rooted in the belief that nurturing partnerships that involve all stakeholders is actually critical to achieve desired results and to reach the goal of building inclusive societies through the creation of inclusive schools. Ladies and gentlemen, the time has come to finally unveil the report. You must have all been wondering, where is this report? So I will ask our teams to start the distribution immediately. We gave it only to the speakers ahead of time, but I hope we have enough to cover the number of people who are here today. And I would like to say that, to use this opportunity to say here that this publication was made possible through the financial support of two institutions. First, I would like to mention the U Foundation, Education for Children in Need, based in Germany and led by UNESCO Special Ambassador Ute Henriette Hooghoven and supported by Claudia Jürger. They have accepted initially to fund the first 2 years of production of this annual report, and we are very grateful. We're planning, for those of you who may be interested to work with us on this, to focus next year on vocational training, which is another very important issue here in India. And the second institution, and I'm keeping them for last because they were actually the first to work with us on this issue and to also contribute financially through the preparation of reports in the past couple of years. I want to thank the CBM India Trust under the guidance of Dr. Sarah Varugese. So Sarah, my question is simple. First of all, thank you very much to all of you and also for serving on the editorial board. Would you do it again?
Thank you, Eric. And to answer your question, I think we need to just talk about the journey which we have been through. So I think what these videos and pictures have so beautifully captured is the joy on children's faces when they are able to learn, when they achieve something, even if it's a very simple thing. And this journey is not just the journey of an individual child, it's the journey of the school which is teaching them, it's the journey of their family, it's the journey of organizations and institutions which have supported inclusive education, and it is the journey our society and our country is making. It's not a destination. We are still on that journey. CBM has been in this journey for a long time, 50 years in India. We are proud that some of the first courses for teaching educators of children with disabilities were started with CBM support in the early 80s in Coimbatore with Bharatiyar University and Avinashlingam University, then in Trichy. And even before that, we had models of what was then integrated education, and we moved with us what were former special schools through reverse inclusion and now serving as resource centers for government schools in their community. CBM doesn't believe that we are doing this alone. It's not just about us and or our partners, though we have that pool of expertise. But for this journey to become reality, we need many people beyond those in this room to be taking part in the journey of inclusive education. We are very happy to share our knowledge, the resource material, good practice models, and to partner with whoever we can, not necessarily financially, but to share that knowledge, that expertise, and we look forward to working more with UNESCO in this way as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sarah. The report is slowly making its way through the room, so I hope that we can expedite it because we're coming to the conclusion of our program. But before we do, and ask all of you to be involved in one last thing, we would like to thank all those who have participated in the report, try to thank, because it's quite impossible to thank everybody. Many of the institutions who are working for the education of children with disabilities have not been recognized in the video, and I apologize to them. But many people were involved, so rather than trying to recognize a long list of people, we wanted to treat you, while the report is being distributed, to a making of the report video. UNESCO has worked for more than 70 years in India on issues related to education, culture, and the sciences. We work very closely with the government, in particular, when it comes to education, with the Ministry of Human Resource Development. Knowing in particular the interest of Prime Minister Modi for matters related to education, we wanted to offer an additional contribution and bring out every year a report focusing on one specific issue. This year, we decided to focus on children with disabilities. This has obviously been a collaborative effort, and many people have been involved. Our education team has been at the center of the coordination for this report, and of course I want to mention Huma, who's worked very closely with our partners at the Tata Institute of Social Sciences. And of course Omar is our head of the education team here at UNESCO New Delhi. He's worked around the world in a number of locations and brings with him a lot of experience, which has been useful also for this report. Every serious report must be properly peer-reviewed, and that's why we appointed a high-level editorial board. I want to say a great big thank you to the editorial board and to Subba, Anita, Sarah, Ananta, and Arman. All the hard work and the research for this report was actually done by our partners at the Tata Institute of Social Sciences, and I want to recognize all the hard work they put in this report. They worked tirelessly for weeks on end, and we are very grateful. I want to recognize in particular, among the team of about 15 people who worked on this report, Archana, Mithili, Bhagyalakshmi, and Sonia. In the end, the promotion of the report is, of course, important. We need to make sure that the public and all the stakeholders know about the report, and for that we entrusted Rekha and Nitya. Behind the scenes, many other people made sure that we would deliver this report on time, including, of course, our administrative team. They too need to be recognized. Okay, so now I trust everybody got their copy of the report. So this is the end of our presentation. We hope you didn't find it too long. Sorry, we started a little bit late. Please join us afterwards for lunch. I hope that you have time to stay with us for some time and exchange. A big part of these events is also about networking, but please do me a favor and without standing up, raise high this report that I think we can all be proud of, and I hope that the photographers will be able to take this rather than a boring picture with 3 people on the stage. It's much more important that all of us make this report our own and work to make a difference for children with disabilities. Thank you very, very much to all of you for coming today.